If given a choice, would you trust the military thinking of a former real estate developer and a former Weekend Fox host, or the thinking of decorated generals and admirals? Coming up next, some of the greatest military minds we have just sounded off on Trump and Hegseth. And did one of them speak the near unspeakable phrase, war crimes? We'll see. Let's begin this cavalcade of Army and Navy expertise with a general speaking of chaos, an admiral speaking of high risk and casualties, and then I'll reveal who is suggesting our bone-spurred commander-in-chief is guilty of atrocities.
Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, a retired commander of the U.S. Army Europe.
Their Navy's destroyed, their Army's destroyed. They're not quite yet, but it's close to that. He's done a lot of bombing, so it's going to mean chaos in that country. And we have seen, I was once a war planner on the Joint Staff, and I'll tell you the contingency plans that are on the books in the Pentagon right now, some of the worst case scenarios are when you have chaos and dysfunction inside of a country and it implodes. So what do we have? We don't have a leader. They now have another Ayatollah as their leader. Their army's been severely damaged. The people are confused. You take a look at Tehran right now, and it almost looks like it's heading toward the same thing that's in Gaza.
Now, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, the president continues to not rule out the use of ground troops. Secretary Hegseth also said, we're not going to say no ground troops. But if ground troops were to be introduced in some form or fashion, what exactly do you think the options are there? What are they talking about?
This is high-risk stuff. And, of course, we're all very pleased with the way the Venezuela raid came about, highly precise special forces. But we've had other raids in our past, including in Iran, Desert One back in 1980, which was a failure. And in Afghanistan, around the time I was in command of that NATO mission, a little before that, we lost 19 special forces, the best of the best, in the high mountains of Afghanistan on a raid after Taliban, frankly, low-level leadership. So these are high-risk operations. They don't always go as smoothly as something like Venezuela. I'm sure the president and the team are weighing all of that.
No doubt about that. Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
And just a reminder that the admiral who once oversaw the bin Laden mission once said this about Trump. Retired four-star admiral and former Navy SEAL William McRaven on Donald Trump. Through your actions, you have embarrassed us in the eyes of our children, humiliated us on the world stage, and worst of all, divided us as a nation. And now for the biggest shot fired of all. Watch as Lawrence Wilkerson, retired Army colonel, puts Trump on blast with the two words rarely uttered within the ranks.
I come from an administration of George W. Bush and Richard Bruce Cheney that committed war crimes that Colin Powell and his lawyer Will Taft and I agonized over in trying to present some message to the American people about them. This administration has committed more war crimes in the last few days than I think any country since Adolf Hitler committed. And that is an incredible condemnation of this entire process. We have bombed civilians relentlessly. We have bombed a school. We have bombed a hospital. We have struck facilities in the nature of Tehran's oil capacity that is now putting black poison all over 10 plus million people. And we are essentially not bombing ballistic missile sites and bombing war materiel. We're bombing people. We took a lesson from the IDF, if you will. We are bombing people, as incidentally they are still doing in Gaza and doing now in Lebanon to a fare thee well. These are all war crimes. And one wishes with fond hope that someday we might be called before the bar of justice and have to account for these war crimes. And what you just talked about is a crime also in the eyes of international relations and people who want to keep decent international relations ongoing in the world. We're destroying that. And on top of all of that, and this is the real serious problem here for America, Trump and Hegseth and Rubio and the other entourage of their national security complex have completely misjudged the nature of this war, as has to a certain extent Bibi Netanyahu. This is a country as big as Western Europe with 93 million people, probably 90 million of whom will fight us to the bitter death, who live in terrain that almost killed Alexander the Great, It is entirely inhospitable to military operations, and Trump is actually talking about putting ground forces there. And the only way he will be able to claim any nature of victory is to do that. Only that will be the end of the empire's presence in the Levant and the Middle East in general, because we will not be able to sustain that economically, physically. We do not have the soldiers or Marines to do that. But that's what he's talking about. This is pure nonsense.
I appreciate the generals and admirals who call it like they see it. Their voices are so important during this time of chaos and military corruption. And I'll give the final word to General Hertling, who digs deep and speaks of the emotional toll that will be paid as more soldiers are lost to Trump's lawless war.
The thing that has been recurring in my mind is a lack of seriousness and an understanding of what happens when you put America's sons and daughters into harm's way. That when you charge into something like this and think that dropping bombs on a country can win a war, and you don't have significant amount of planning to determine what the end state's going to look like. I've told so many people during my several times in combat, I have a box with 253 cards with pictures of soldiers that were part of our command, that sacrificed, gave their all. Every day I look at that box, pull a couple of pictures out, and think about where they would be today if they were still alive. That's the kind of seriousness that you have to take when you put America's sons and daughters into harm's way, and it has to be for the good of the country. When you've got the kind of polling that we've seen, that you've reported on a nightly basis, that most Americans don't want this, they don't understand why we're doing it. The president hasn't won over the popular support of the nation and the citizens, which is one of the roles of a president. It tells me we're not very serious about putting those young men and women in harm's way.